And as we see it, we really should be giving the host a lot more value than we're asking. And of course, like we now have enough data to show that overall, depending a little bit on the what end of the market you're in, but if you run something like mid to high end, just the damage that we prevent should easily pay for the product. The problem is that a big rager of a party might only ever happen once every 5 years or something. But then it can be pretty catastrophic when it does, right? So
Mm.
it's a bit like an insurance in that you can maybe pay a little bit per month, but then you are reducing the likelihood that anything really bad will happen. We've also now, especially in the last few months, when in Europe there's a big energy crisis with
Mm.
electricity rates spiking and cost of heating spiking, and it can be um, multiples of what it used to be. So the fact that we have occupancy and motion data from inside of apartments means we can use that to partner up with thermostat manufacturers and save energy to our customers. That is also starting to you know actually pay off. It can be comparable to the software price that we're charging. So the way we've done our job when a customer installs Minute, and now they have more money the next month.
You're listening to Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, a podcast for those who are in and around the hospitality industry who love, live, and breathe what they do. You can join us for candid and unscripted conversations with hospitality experts and founders as we go deeper into their personal stories while they're sharing their triumphs and trials that got them to where they are today. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and you're listening to an episode of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. Now, let's begin. All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. I'm your host, once again, Will Slickers, and today I am joined by Nils Mattisson, who is the CEO and co-founder of Minut. And Nils, it has been a long time in the making, to say the least, for this episode. So I'm super excited to have you on. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm very happy that we're finally here.
Me too. Me too. It's been what, if I would say 3 or 4 years in the making. So, yeah, give or take. We'll credit some of that time to COVID. But I'm pumped because you and I got to connect behind the scenes. We always do a pre-chat with all of our guests on the show, as all of our listeners know. And it was really awesome for me to hear more of your story that maybe I didn't know publicly, but then also kind of hearing your passion and expression for what you guys are doing at Minut. And so I want to give you the opportunity to kind of give us an intro to your journey as an entrepreneur, professional career, all that stuff, and kind of what led you just to kind of co-founding Minut and to creating it to what it is today.
What a good question. I can talk for a long time on that, I think. But I think the story I told you when we met was really a chance encounter. I was at the time working for Apple, living out in California in San Francisco, and one of my friends brought along a guy to a bar, as you do. And it turned out to be one of the first employees at Airbnb. And we got to talk about, all the different issues that you run into those very, very early days of the company. And one of them was pertaining to people putting up cameras as they were renting out their flats, which you could have a lot of sympathy for hosts, especially in those early days when every guest was essentially a first-time guest, and people were, to a greater extent than today, I think, letting out their own homes. But of course, as a guest, you really wanted to have full privacy when you're going somewhere, and that's what you deserve. So I remember that as like a very interesting problem where you sort of had to balance the privacy expectations as a guest with the monitoring needs that you would get as a host. That idea stuck with me for some time. But of course, it's a long time ago, maybe 2008 or 2009. I wasn't quite ready to start my own company then. But if you spend too many years in San Francisco, it's eventually you sort of have to do a startup.
Yeah.
And so when I had been at Apple for I think 7 or 8 years, I sort of got this itch that I wanted to do something on my own, and this idea came back to me that there is clearly something we can do here that is quite an interesting space, which hasn't really been explored before. So that was probably the origin of Minut. Of course, we like most companies at that time, I think we launched a Kickstarter at first.
Mm.
And that was a blessing and a curse because it got us some money, it got us some early customers, but unfortunately, a lot of them were consumers. There were people who were on Kickstarter looking for a cool thing rather than the short-term rental host that we had intended to target. And so we were led a little bit astray there, and focused perhaps a little bit too much on the consumer side of the business. But we've since found our way back, and we're now 100% focused on core hosts and property managers working in short-term rentals. But I think that's like the very, very sort of quick summary of many years of running a startup and trying some things that didn't work, going into some dead ends and backpedaling, but then sort of using the things you've learned to create something that is a little bit better every week.
No, 100%. I love that. There's a lot to take away from your experience from Apple. How much of that was really applied into the creation of Minut? As the brand has grown, obviously, I'm sure it's changed a lot over the years of from the first starting of the Kickstarter campaign and everything like that. But what key experience did you take from Apple that you applied to the company today, and or maybe applied back then and still apply today? Would love to know that.
Um, I mean, I would say two sides to that. Like, there's of course like the very practical things. Like, Apple isn't usually credited for it, but it was very early on in using machine learning and privacy in combination to get both sort of the benefits that you can get, but without sacrificing privacy of consumers. There was a lot of very early work in just being at the forefront of technology and there was some enabling techniques, I would say, in terms of edge processing and low power electronics that was crucial in shaping the product that is now Minut. But I think those kind of things are maybe less important than the culture, like the healthy disrespect for what people call impossible, and the drive to always create something that is a little bit better than the competition, as well as like an instinct to always raise the bar and to push things a little bit further. I think that served us really well because there are a lot of good companies out there. There are a lot of there's a lot of great ideas coming from different startups, and if you're not setting yourself a very high bar, I think it's very easy to become one of 3, 4, 5 that are quite similar. And of course, that's a bit of a death spiral because when you end up with 5 identical offerings, what you end up with price competition and lower margins, and then you don't really have the room to maneuver and innovate. I think both of those things, like the technical excellence, but also like the culture of bringing out products that really like stand head and shoulders above everything else out there, has served us really well.
Well, you said earlier too that the Kickstarter was both a good and a bad thing. So let's talk about how that campaign kind of really shifted you guys towards the consumer rather than the actual short-term rental host and operator. How long did it take for you guys to kind of be like, okay, we really need to get back on track of the host and STR company rather than the traveler or the booker or whatever the typical consumer might have been. I think when you and I talked the first time, kind of talked about how actually these people were just using them in their own like homes, like their own house. They weren't using it for like a vacation rental in partake that, but really just as a home device for themselves.
Yeah, so I think most startups actually really struggle to find traction with any idea, and we had the issue of having traction with two ideas. Like there was the privacy conscious home security or home monitor system that isn't what we intended, but is what a lot of our early customers ended up using the product as, and there is a large market for a product of that type. Um, but we always had this sort of like core of short-term rental users. Like our first Kickstarter video, it was um, featuring an Airbnb host, and it was like tailored to that market. But of course, most of those people weren't on Kickstarter, so but it still found its way up there. So I don't know what the split was in those days, but both groups were very active. It's just that there are so many more consumers,
Yeah.
um, and I'm gonna say it took us a good couple of years before we decided to go all in on the short-term rental track. And there were a couple of catalysts. One was that we started out without having a recurring business model. We were only selling the devices, and then we were always going to to start charging a subscription. You sort of have to be able to run a sustainable business these days. But we weren't sure exactly how we were gonna set it up. And one of the key learnings was that when you're selling to a short-term rental operator, we can actually save them money, or we can make their business better. And so it's not just a cost, right? Like it's something that can enhance the guest experience or your relationships with your community. Whichever key benefit it is you're after. Like it has like a real price. Whereas on the consumer side, that's a lot. It's a lot harder, and the competition is a lot more. So the realization that there was a much higher willingness to pay in the short-term rental community was important. But the most important thing was probably the involvement of Airbnb, who reached out and were very enthusiastic and saw this as something that was an integral part of the home sharing experience in the future. And of course, with that leverage, like with that distribution help, we could really take a commanding lead in that market. Whereas on the consumer side, maybe we were, well, definitely not the leading ones, because those are all the names that but a smaller actor. And I think that's a key learning for me as well, is that it's a much better position to be a category leader in a small category rather than a smaller player in a bigger field.
I love that. And that's a really good point. I actually kind of want to ask, it's like a simple question actually that we probably should have started off with in the beginning, but what is Minut? What is the device? What do you guys do for hosts and operators? Because I know we have a lot of longtime listeners to the show that probably obviously know who you are because they're operators, and it's hard not to know who Minut is. But for any new listeners, I think it would just be great to kind of cover like what do you guys do for hosts and property management companies?
Right. So I would say most people would describe us as a noise and occupancy monitoring company. Like that's probably like where most of our customers get uh, most of the value. And very importantly, we do this monitoring in a privacy cautious way that doesn't pick up any information that can be sensitive for an individual or can even be connected to a specific individual. And that noise and occupancy monitoring is a super important part of running a professional management company. We zoom out a little bit, right? And we internally at Minut, and also like as we communicate, we see ourselves as a co-host. So our mission is to be there for hosts in different types of situations. We're using the noise and occupancy monitoring, which is at the core of what we do, to provide value-added services that can help people run an efficient business. Can be anything from data about what's going on in the listings that you can use, for example, to turn on or off heating or AC, depending on whether the guest is there or not. It's about messaging at the right time and providing a better guest experience. But the way we see ourselves is like we're sort of the data layer, and then we're enabling a host to be the best that they can be. But yeah, what we're famous for is, of course, like our party prevention, and that is, I would still say, front and center to the to the value that we are creating for our customers.
For you, why was it so important to build a device that can be multi-featural rather than just focusing on just noise or just messaging or just this type of occupancy level and security coverage? Why was that so important, and how's that played into the role of being a co-host and a partner to your clients and operators rather than just being a device that they use and subscribe to?
Yeah, it would be a lot easier to just pick one feature and wrap that into a product and sell it. And there are some benefits to that. But I think there are two really good reasons why that's a sort of a technological dead end. And the first is that this system really shines when you get different types of data and you can connect them, and you can create something that is better because you have different data sources. So, for example, take a combination of noise and occupancy, which we pioneered years ago. Take something like a party. It is really helpful to be able to detect that before it gets noisy, when people are starting to show up in too big numbers. And likewise, it's very important to be able to detect if it's just a few people, but they are really disturbing their neighbors, right? So the core functionality actually gets better by having these two data sources. Another important aspect is thankfully, 98% of guests are good people, and if you run a small operation, you might never run into any of these issues. Otherwise, the industry wouldn't really work. But it also means that the prime value of the product is not, if you are only focused on noise monitoring, is maybe not seen day to day. And so that's why we see that it's so important that we also help with security, that we also help with giving guests access, so that we're part of the daily routine and the daily life of running a property management company. Because when we are interacting with guests and hosts on a daily basis, we're building up that trust. That means that when something happens, you can trust it will be there for you. And that, I think, is going to be lost if you are creating a sort of a single sensor type company.
For sure. And how's that played into this partnership that you guys formed with Airbnb? And that's kind of a big deal when the biggest OTA for short-term rentals and hosts and a lot of property managers to use that, they've seen that trust, right? So how's that played in the role with that partnership with them?
We worked with Airbnb for many years now, and I've always felt that we've been very aligned in our mission, right? Like
Mm.
um, the Minute being the core host, or the Minute being the co-host, um, is um, um, is the proposition that we deliver to our customers. Um, our mission is to make home sharing work better for everyone. So we want to help create an industry that is good for the community, that is good for the guests, and that's good for the host. And we see ourselves as being able to be a bit of a mediator between these different parties. So I think that alignment has been quite important. I think the global reach is another one.
Yeah.
Of course, short-term rental is now a global phenomenon. Like there, it has like we have customers in over 100 countries already, and of course the phenomenon is even wider than that. And I think we're probably the only company that has that sort of global reach and that can support um, global companies. Like, of course, we don't only work with Airbnb, we also work with companies like Casa, for example,
Yeah.
which is another very large, but they're a property manager, and they have properties in many different countries, and there weren't that many alternatives for them if they wanted something that could support their portfolio internationally.
Oh, I love that. And yeah, the way you guys kind of built it to really represent, I guess maybe represent's not the best word, but to really take away that barrier to entry. I think there's a lot of people, if you're going to be international, there's different types of plugins and outlets and all sorts of ways to do it. So the fact that Minute is a simple battery charge away, and you don't like everyone can charge something now. So it's not like it's a big barrier to stop people from getting Minute. So it just makes so much sense on why you guys would go that route and why that simple feature is so important for that global reach. Um, you were talking about multiple data sets, and just like zooming out, being a co-host. This is super important for you guys as a company to make the industry better, in a lot of ways. But for you personally, as a founder, I'm curious to know, when you went out and started this adventure, and I know I asked you this back on our pre-chat, but when you set out to be doing this company with an interaction at a bar, meeting one of the first employees at Airbnb, to now where you guys are a pretty big team, as we'll probably see at VRMA. There's going to be quite a few of you, and it's just super exciting to see the growth and to hear the story. So when you started, did you really think you would get to this level of growth, and from a team's perspective, from a client perspective, or did you really? I guess like it's hard to ask this question because not a lot of founders really start a company just to think it's going to be a small little thing. Like obviously they all want to go big. But I would love to just know what your initial like thinking was when you started the company.
Yeah, it's a good question. And if you would have asked me when I started, I probably would have said that it would have been even bigger and having even more reach than what we actually have. It's like it sometimes looking back, I feel like it looked quite straightforward, right? Like you, as an engineer, especially like you have your idea about the product, you can sort of see how all the things come together, and you're probably underestimating all of the other things that you are yet to learn about. And I think that is definitely a blessing, because if I had known how difficult it was going to be and how long it was going to take, maybe I would have stayed at Apple.
That's too funny. Yeah, it's never as fast as we think it is. Um, I know there's a lot on the horizon for you guys. One, as anyone who's listening, if you've listened to previous episodes, you'd know that we're partnered together on the podcast. But this interview, again, was long overdue. So for a lot of the listeners, give us a sneak peek on, I guess, what's in the works with Minute. Um, Maybe some things you guys have seen the last 2 years. I hate bringing it up, but COVID was such a pivotal part for what the industry has seen from all the craziness in the early days to then the skyrocket in usage and adoption and the overall consumer. So what's next for Minute, and what have you guys really seen that's played a big role into kind of your trajectory growth and to the next phase of the company?
Yeah, so our next big release is going to be an outdoor sensor, or to be more precise, we're actually making um, all sensors work indoors and outdoors. Wherever you want to place them, you should be able to place them. And this has been a very ambitious project. We could have again made it simple for us and done an outdoor sensor that was an add-on to an existing indoor solution. But we actually heard from a lot of customers that one, those connections are quite frail. A lot of people are only concerned about outdoor noise because that is in some environments what is really traveling to the neighbors and communities. So we set out to create a completely standalone sensor that could be placed literally anywhere in the world. And a little bit like starting a startup, like you realize after a while that it's a bigger challenge. So one of the things that we have ended up investing a ton in is to build our machine learning capabilities so that we can actually differ between different types of noise outdoors. Because it turns out that wind is really, really noisy, but you don't want to set off any alarms or send any messages based on that. So we've invested heavily in a machine learning team who has done a privacy conscious sound classifier that can exclude things like wind noise from outdoors and provide customers with I think a much better experience than anything else that is out there on the market today. So that's what's on the immediate horizon, and we're very, very, very proud to launch this now in the coming weeks. Your question about around COVID, I think that's also like an interesting. It's been a bit of a roller coaster for us, and I think for everyone in the industry. We, like everyone in March, we took a quick hit in revenue, like people were not sure about what was going to come next. But for us at Minute, it turned around in really like a matter of weeks, because what happened was that short-term rental was actually one of the few things you could do with your leisure time, and people were starting to drive to locations when they couldn't fly. So it was this big shift in terms of like where the demand was. And I'm really proud of the industry and the community as a whole to sort of respond to that shift in demand and provide, I think, a better experience than hotels had been able to.
Mhm.
So for us, I mean, that was a bit of an opportunity. There were some things where demand was like suddenly very, very high, contactless check-ins, for example. Um, and oftentimes the host couldn't go to their properties really between even between bookings
Mm.
if they were not in the city. And so we built a lot of features around contactless access, security between bookings, guest messaging that really helped like create that workflow that enable hosts to run a more hands-off operation. And that's obviously stuck. Like that's
Yeah.
something I think is here to stay now. Um, so yeah, COVID was a roller coaster, but
Yeah.
sometimes you need to stress test the system.
Well, it's fascinating to me because I think, going from a couple features to then this whole ecosystem that really, like, as we all know, vacation rental managers or even hosts today have such a high cost when it comes to their tech stack. There's so many things to add, especially if you're not just relying on Airbnb. If you are relying just on Airbnb as a solo platform and maybe a couple smart locks and maybe if you're savvy enough to add some dynamic pricing software on the back end. But outside of that, most people usually get a PMS. They add all these extra things that go into it. So that 25 or 20% commission they're taking from the revenue is just going down and down and down. So the fact that you guys have created this whole ecosystem of features and workflows that really tie into the operators day to day, limiting that increase of having to buy more products, I think is super smart because, um, I always joke there's always that big piece of pie that everyone's trying to take from, but when it comes to the property manager's piece of pie, it's a very small piece, and then you got everyone else putting their fork in it trying to take it. So it can get very costly. So just want to say kudos, I guess, to creating an ecosystem that really does limit that one sliver of pie being decreased into a smaller and smaller fraction.
Yeah, and as we see it, we really should be giving the host a lot more value than we're asking. And of course, like we now have enough data to show that overall, depending a little bit on the what end of the market you're in, but if you run something like mid to high end, just the damage that we prevent should easily pay for the product. The problem is that a big rager of a party might only ever happen once every 5 years or something. And but then it can be pretty catastrophic when it does, right? So
Mhm.
it's a bit like an insurance in that you can maybe pay a little bit per month, but then you are reducing the likelihood that anything really bad will happen. We've also now, especially in the last few months, when at least in Europe, there's a big energy crisis with electricity rates spiking and cost of heating spiking. And it can be, multiples of what it used to be. So the fact that we have occupancy and motion data from inside of apartments means we can use that to partner up with thermostat manufacturers and um, save energy to our customers. That is also starting to you know actually pay off and can be comparable to the software price that we're charging. So the way we've done our job when a customer installs Minute, and now they have more money the next month.
I like it. I like that. That's a good way to
It's a
phrase it.
goal. It's a goal, right? Like I
Yeah.
mean, we gotta strive for something.
Yeah. Oh, it's really interesting. And I guess one of my, I guess, closing questions for you would be around regulations, right? So you guys have all this data set now with motion, occupancy, and of course, noise. When it comes to this, has been the biggest conversation. And I had the pleasure of meeting some of your team at the Florida Alliance Vacation Rental conference in Orlando just a few weeks ago. And going into that conference, I wasn't expecting regulation to be the biggest topic, but really was the headline of everyone's day-to-day conversation. And with that, having that data set, what are you able to do when it comes to potential bans and regulatory issues that limit your clients or your customers to really grow or continue to operate in just their market that they've been in? Are you guys playing a role with that data as in the sense of kind of stepping in as a provider to really showcase the not just the neighbors saying that it's loud, but like really showing that hey, it was loud or it was not loud based on the guess, and we were able to catch it early rather than hours later after the cops were already called.
So absolutely, yes, we do a lot of work with the data, but even in the step before that, I really see that we have a role in um, sort of diffusing these conflicts that we often have in communities. That is the source of the regulation, right? Like the regulation isn't um, people who are just deciding that they're going to do this for no good reason. It comes from people in our communities feeling that the short-term rental industry isn't a net contributor, and I want to make sure that we are. And I think part of that is being very proactive when it comes to noise and nuisance, and making sure that neighbors have a good experience. Um, and finding that right balance between the interest of guests and hosts and the community, because we all want this when we're traveling. Like, of course, we should want this next to us. Well, we should want it as part of every community. And I think using technology like Minute, but there are other things as well, to make sure that we are good neighbors. If we start at that step, maybe we would see less of a pressure on the regulation, because I think a lot of these either outright bans or number of night bans that we have in London or in Amsterdam, or even number of stays in a year. Like they're very bad instruments to solve something, right? Like if you'd rather say, okay, what are the things that people are complaining about? And it's typically, and I should say them that like people in the community, it's typically noise and nuisance that comes up. And then to an extent, it's house prices that may be a bit harder for us to influence. So I see us coming in as early as possible, so we don't get that pressure for regulation. But when we do get the pressure for regulation, we do work closely with different community organizations to provide them with the data that they need in order to influence the regulators. So this is also something that we have been working very closely with the public policy team at every to sort of like get that ground truth, and seeing that a lot of these complaints might not be real, and then on the other hand of it, like you can see that the number of cases after you install Minute in a listing is actually very, very few. And of course, there is a very positive benefit to the local economy, to local businesses. And I think, I mean, I hope it doesn't sound too ambitious, but I think the world is a better place because of short-term lets, and for allowing people to visit communities and living in them like locals. So we should cherish that, and I think do everything we can to protect it.
I love that. That's like perfect hammer on the nail right there. One of my favorite questions to usually kind of wrap up an interview with is like, where can people find you? But I have a feeling you'll probably be able to answer this question better. And this is going to be like probably a first time on the podcast, but do you have a favorite quote? Is there something there's a quote from either person you look up to, a company you admire, or anything that you would love to share with anyone listening today? And sorry to put you on the spot.
That's a good question. Do I have a favorite quote? I'm not actually sure which author wrote this, but I think it's Oscar Wilde or Mark Twain, one of them. And he said, "We're all in the gutters, but some of us are looking at the stars." And I like that. We're sort of all on the same earth, but it's nice to lift your gaze and try to be a bit ambitious, I guess.
I like that. I'm glad I asked you that question, because that's a good quote. So now for the actual final question, where, if you have anyone that's maybe first time listening, or wants to get to connect with you more or learn more about Minute, where can they go? What's the one link you would send them to if we could point them in that direction?
I mean, the easiest is always to go to our website, minut.com. There you can buy our products. You can learn more about who we are and what we do. I'm also super available on email. Send me an email, nils@minut.com. I love hearing from customers and partners, so don't be shy. But yeah, go to our website, check out the offering. If you're an Airbnb host, you can also find us through the community center. So there are many ways. If you're a short-term rental operator and you haven't been able to find us, let me know, and I'll make sure that we add some marketing in your end of the world.
I love that. Well, Nils, it's been so good to hear your story and hear just everything behind the scenes with Minute and what you guys are building and how you've built it. It's been inspiring. I I think that quote was one of my favorite parts. I love that type of perspective and thinking around, we're all in the gutters, but some of us choose to look up and look at a better view than what's maybe right at our feet. And so, no, that's a great way to end it. And I just want to say thank you for being on the podcast today, and looking forward to working with you and the team more, and seeing you at PRMA.
It's been great speaking to you, Will. I'm looking forward to our next chat.
Awesome. All right, Slick Talkers, you heard it here first. Make sure you check out everything in the show notes, like and subscribe to everything about Minut, and we'll see you all again next week. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our show partners for making Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, possible. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we would love to connect with you outside of the podcast. So you can follow us on all of our social media channels for daily hospitality content, or find us on slicktalkthepodcast.com. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and we will see you guys all again next week.